Welcome. Imagine if it were possible to do a blood test using just a tiny quantity of blood from a finger prick, and if it were possible to do blood tests very, very quickly, easily, and accessibly. Does that sound too good to be true? Unfortunately, it very likely is, as a number of extremely disillusioned investors have discovered over the past 7 years, or the past several years. So today we're going to be talking about the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos scandal. Joining me today is somebody who brings a wealth of scientific expertise. Meghann Ribbens has a PhD in molecular biology. Welcome, Meghann. So for starters, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that interests you about this topic?
It's there's definitely a very personal angle to it. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of tell you how I heard about this, because let me say, if it's news that doesn't get talked about on TDO, as far as I know, it doesn't happen. I have pretty much cut out all news except for TDO, which is a shameless plug. I realize that. So that may explain why I had never heard of Theranos until after the company imploded. The reason I did hear about it was because I should back up and say, I've mentioned this on another episode, but I've been working in the biotech industry, mostly around Cambridge, Massachusetts, for over a decade. I have seen some stuff. I'm going to try to avoid the details in this episode, though it will probably come up at some point in the future. But the reason this is coming up, I was talking to one of my Ayn Rand University professors about some of the stuff I had seen in my career. And he said, apropos to nothing, have you heard of Theranos? I was like, no. Although I have worked in the diagnostic space before. It was for COVID. It wasn't for bloodborne diagnostics. And so that will give you some indication of how personal this is to me, because so the reason this was my professor brought this up was I was talking about how I discovered that this company I'd been working for was basing their dosage on a metric that in no way indicated the therapeutic effect. So essentially, they were knowingly dosing their patients who are already sick with a placebo. And I pointed this out to them, and they wanted nothing to do with me. So it happens, and it doesn't just happen at Theranos. I don't really know how to express in words how upsetting it is to me that there are people in high positions in biotech companies who know that their patients are children, that they're already sick, and they're willing to let them take these vomit-inducing placebos, but they exist. And that's really why I want to talk about this. I can't say that this episode is going to prevent that, but if it sheds light on this, I feel like I will have done something helpful. So let me ask you, Daniel, I'll turn it around to you. Why did you agree to this?
Well, so I hadn't really heard about Elizabeth Holmes or Theranos until about a day or two ago. Razi said, "Hey, Meghann wants to do an episode on Elizabeth Holmes." So I quickly did some research, looked up some clips of her talking. So I watched the TED talk that she did, the TED Med talk that she did back in 2014. Where she's wearing the Steve Jobs style black turtleneck, which was kind of a trademark of hers, where she talks about, we envision a world where people will have access to rapid diagnosis. She went on for about 16 or 17 minutes. I thought this all sounds very, very interesting. Now, just to give our audience a little bit of context here, Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos back in 2003. She was 19 years old. I think she dropped out of Stanford at the time. She was in her freshman year at Stanford. She dropped out, somehow managed to raise something like $700 million, nearly $1 billion from all these investors, started this company with her then boyfriend, Sunny, what's his name? Sunny Baswami, something. He's a sort of Indian
Something like that.
businessman, entrepreneur, and they were carrying on a romantic relationship for something like a decade. Now, when things started to go really sour was around 2015. There were some scientists and some regulators who were beginning to raise all these red flags that, there was no peer-reviewed literature about what Theranos was doing, and there were some suspicions that investors were being lied to, deceived. Can you tell us a little bit of your understanding of how the Theranos fairy tale started to unravel, how things started to go sour from a business and from a scientific perspective?
Sure. I mean, so let me tell you how I know what I know. So I watched the documentary The Inventor, and it just checked a lot of boxes that I had already seen. And then I listened to every single episode of this podcast called The Dropout, where they interviewed a bunch of the people connected to Theranos, a couple of the whistleblowers, and then followed the trial almost until the verdict. So if you're asking me where I think it started to unravel, I think it started at the very beginning. And so let me tell you what kind of rung a lot of bells for me. It was when one of the engineers was talking about how, and he didn't give specific about how they kept insisting that everything had to happen in this box, and they actually would always sort of shape the dimensions of the box. And he'd say, we can't do that. Can we make the box a little bigger? Due to physics and biochemistry, what you're saying is impossible. It's like trying to add 2 and 2 and get 5. So can we make the box a little bigger? And there were just sort of these arbitrary categorical imperatives. It's probably I'm probably repeating myself when I say that. About stuff that just really didn't matter. And the reason that rings a lot of bells for me, and this is going to come up again in this episode, so buckle up, is because I've seen that a lot. And sometimes it's not arbitrary. But there is, even for a lot of scientists, a pernicious lack of curiosity. To just be able to say, okay, these are what the data are telling us. We can choose to ignore it, or we can choose to act on it. We may not like the initial outcome, but we can't pick a fight with reality. And yet a lot of scientists and engineers do. So that, we can talk about, was Elizabeth Holmes deceitful? Who was she deceiving? Was she purposefully deceiving her investors, or was she deceiving herself? And to me, that is beside the point. The cardinal sin of Elizabeth Holmes was that lack of curiosity. Now, we can talk about how there were technicians and research associates, the people who are doing the day-to-day lab work, who'd run tests, and they'd run replicates, which is very normal. And they'd see that one test maybe gave you a number of 1. That's a completely arbitrary number. See where I'm going with this. And then another would give you 1.5, and another would give you 0.8, and then one would give you 7. That's concerning, right? Like, if your test has an error of 600%, you really can't make any conclusions from it. But routinely, they were told to just ignore the data that the management didn't like. Now, if you can prove that one data point, that something happened, there was a misfiring somewhere, fine. That's not what they did. In fact, if data points 1.8 and 1.5 were the ones they didn't want, those were the ones they discarded. That's not being real curious about the data. That's trying to impose the data. And again, it's picking a fight with reality. These technicians were horribly intimidated, and by that they were receiving communications from very high up lawyers like David Boies, saying, you know, one of the whistleblowers, their family spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to, you know, he was trying to do the right thing and let people know you should, you know, you may think you have cancer based on these Theranos diagnostics. It's going to affect your life in really meaningful ways, and it's a lie. And he had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in lawyer fees. They were essentially trying to punish him for trying to do the right thing. That sure happens too. So I don't know. Do you have any opinions about where it all went wrong?
What I'm trying to understand is exactly how much medical or scientific knowledge did Elizabeth Holmes have? I mean, she dropped out while a freshman at Stanford. I mean, primarily she was an entrepreneur, and initially she seemed like a very successful one. You know, Forbes made a big deal of her. There was she was interviewed by Bill Clinton, but then when some of the information started to get out around 2015, her net worth very rapidly went from something like 4.5 billion to basically nothing. So clearly she wasn't that great an entrepreneur either, being a dishonest entrepreneur. So how much did she know about what was actually going on? And was she listening to the people working for her, the technicians? Was she listening to their feedback? You know, things aren't right here, the numbers aren't working out. Was she actually trying to suppress, keep the truth from coming out?
I mean, I think there was definitely an element of that. And again, when someone tries to tell you the error rate of this makes this test worse than useless, and you punish them for telling you what's going on, that's not just, you know, to use the objectivist parlance, that's not drift. That's not just being unaware. That's evasion. That's making an effort to rewrite reality, in a, you know, in a way that doesn't just damage you, which is bad enough, but damages everyone else. You know, there were texts between Elizabeth Holmes and her boyfriend, who had some C-suite position in the company, while they were being audited. And I think this was after someone had blown the whistle. So there was either a surprise audit or an audit with very short notice. And to give you an idea of sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So, you know, so they were texting back and forth saying pray, essentially. The word came up, pray, because they had a basement where they ran the actual tests on other companies' diagnostic machines, because they couldn't get them to work on the Edison, which was the box that they were so in love with, or what Elizabeth Holmes, you know, so there was later called the mini lab, and we can talk about that. It's a minor point, but it's, you know, sort of ridiculous. So yeah, there was definitely some knowledge there, and again, I think there's probably some gray area. Sorry, that's a bit of a pun, but between her ears in terms of what she allowed knowledge and what she didn't. But that again seems pretty beside the point to me. And here's why. Consider diabetics. There are millions of them. And before we had, this is actually an amazing story of genetic engineering. One of the first GMOs was when we took the gene for human insulin and put it into an E. coli, which grows rapidly and makes a lot of protein, and made human insulin from bacteria. Before that, you had to get it from cows, which was expensive. It didn't work very well, and it's immunogenic. You put cow protein in a human body, the immune system is going to have something really nasty to say about it. So it wasn't very good at helping people get the sugar in their blood into their cells. They were starving and had tons of sugar in their bodies that they just couldn't feed them because they don't have insulin doing that job. So even with this new engineered insulin that just made it cheap, it was much better. It saved so many lives, prevented so much blindness and amputation, which, by the way, is like a 5-year death sentence in and of itself. It was such a wonderful story. And what made that possible was diagnostics, where they could take blood tests before every meal throughout the day to make sure that they weren't going to send themselves into a coma either from having too little or too much blood sugar. That's one test. That has been a gift to millions of people with diabetes, that one at-home blood test. Now, if we extend that to another kind of diagnostic, and again, it's not likely that every single disease or health state has a biomarker in your finger blood, in your capillary blood. Not every disease manifests in the blood, believe it or not. But even just one more disease that you could track at home throughout the day would be as much of a gift to people with that disease as the blood sugar test has been to diabetics. And Elizabeth Holmes didn't care about that. Just cared about being famous for having that box that did the stuff somehow. Am I making my point clearly?
Yeah, absolutely. And it raises the question, is there any future for the kind of work, the kind of research that Theranos was supposed to be doing? Is there any future in that those kinds of blood tests?
You know, I was only in the diagnostic space briefly, so I just want to sort of manage expectations about my knowledge there. There are startups out there that are essentially doing a lot of similar things. And, you know, so here's a good example. For those who've used Lumen, right? It's that little device you can just buy online, you can blow into it, and it gives you some metabolic indications, or people who use a Fitbit. The reason those are valuable, it's not quite the same thing as like, you know, pricking your finger and getting blood diagnoses. But the reason those are valuable is because, frankly, there's a lot about human health where we're still at the stage of observation. We're not even at the level of hypothesis. We're looking for more data. Here's a good example. How many hours of sleep does a person need? It probably depends on a whole lot of things: gender, age, whether you've had children or not, your hormonal state, what your diet consists of, what your gut bacteria consists of, whether you have autism or not. And we just don't know. Those factors are so important, and we don't know enough about each of them in any one individual to give an answer. We need those data. We need those data to even make a prediction, and we don't have them. That's really the value of these diagnostics, and just having more data would at least give us something to go on. So yes, there is a future for things like what Theranos purported. And to be frank, this isn't the last time there's going to be fraud and silence. I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. I wish I had something to arm the audience with, so that they'd know if they were going to join a clinical trial or even take an FDA approved drug, or each country has its own sort of FDA equivalent. The EU does. We're looking at patients in Europe at my current company. I wish I could give you some indefatigable defense against scientific fraud, and I can't.
How do you think the Theranos scandal, because this is a fairly high profile scandal, how do you think this will affect the biotech industry? How do you think it'll affect regulation of the industry, future investment in the industry? Are people going to be a little bit more wary now that, especially with the prison sentence and everything that's come out in recent years?
I don't know. The answer is probably not much, save for in one aspect. So, there's a lot of startup biotech in my neck of the woods. And especially during COVID, no other industry was all that there were a couple more productive industries, but really the industry that was productive during the lockdowns was biotech. I still went to work every day. So if you had money to invest, where else were you going to invest it? You were going to invest it in biotech. So there was a lot of stupid money being thrown at biotech because there was nowhere else to put it. And I think a lot of investors just had to hope that they picked a winner. A lot of them weren't. So that was an example that was post Theranos, where a lot of stupid money was being thrown at biotech, and those hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, are just gone. All the effort that it took to make that money, that was meant to build things that made people's lives healthier and longer, are just gone. And that is, I think, the only thing you can say for sure about what we've learned from Theranos and from the COVID lockdowns. In my more serene moments, I realized that there will always be these kind of cult of personalities. There will always be sociopaths. And some of them will get involved in biotech. That doesn't sound terribly serene. Eventually, what they're doing is, again, picking a fight with reality. They're going to lose. And hopefully they don't destroy too much wealth and too much health in the process. I'm sorry, I don't know if that actually answers your question.
It does. It does. Now, the latest news on Elizabeth Holmes is that she's been sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in a prison, in a minimum security women's prison. Apparently, it's the same prison where other celebrities like Martha Stewart have spent some time. Do you think her punishment is appropriate? Do you think it matches the crime that she was guilty of?
I really know nothing about legality. I try to stay on the right side of the law, but beyond that, I have no idea what's an appropriate sentence. I think, given that she was never actually interested in improving the human condition, she never had the means to do so. I don't think she'll ever make the world any better. And that's not going to change. Whether her prison sentence is 11 years or 1100. Beyond that, I don't really have an answer. I don't know. Do you have an opinion?
It's difficult to say because she's not a violent offender. She wasn't out waving a gun or a knife or anything like that. But her actions certainly had a negative effect on a lot of people's lives and a lot of people's health. Very likely people might have had heart attacks or serious ailments as a result of her professional deception. So it's difficult to say.
Yeah, and nearly that billions of dollars. Now it's hard to say if the investors, if Theranos had never existed, would they have spent it any better? I mean, it might have gone to other stupid biotechs, and the fate of that wealth would have been the same. But in as much as there were naive but honest investors that could have used that money to support human health, either diagnostics or therapeutics, that actually could have made things better. It won't now. So what is the appropriate punishment for that? For all the lives that could have been saved or improved? I don't know.
Well, the ultimate punishment for her is her reputation. I don't see how any individual, any collaborator, any investor could possibly trust her again in the future. I mean, despite her attempts to remake her image or whatever when she comes out of prison, I don't know if there's any possibility for rehabilitation here.
Yeah, I mean, I think even in the wake of the New York Times article kind of calling this all out, she managed to get herself a husband and a child. So clearly someone's still, two now, wow. Yeah, someone still like what she's offering. I mean, have I been deceived? Yes. You know what I mean? And can I positively say that had I heard of Theranos 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been really excited without really knowing too much about the mechanics of it? I probably would have been too. So I can't even say that those who are deceived by her now deserve it. Maybe they do, but I honestly don't know. It's, there's a part of me that if I want to give myself some compassion, should probably give them some too. So what the future is for her due to naivete or
I have to ask, sorry, I can't hear you right now. Are you muted right now?
Is that better?
A little bit better, a little bit better. So I was just going to ask you whether you've seen the film about Elizabeth Holmes, where she's played by Amanda Seyfried. Have you watched it or have you heard about it? I haven't seen it myself.
Are you talking about there's a Hulu TV show based on the podcast The Dropout? No, I haven't seen it. After seeing The Inventor and the podcast, I kind of had to draw the line at the Hulu TV show for the simple reason that it was triggering. That's probably a bad thing to admit, but there it is. I don't know, have you seen it?
No, I haven't. But I've heard it's good. I've heard that it's well acted. She gets the voice right and the mannerisms and the sort of unblinking, staring eyes, all those different attributes.
Yeah, I will say that it's funny that so Rosie and I were talking particularly about the baritone voice, and for those who've never heard the old Elizabeth Holmes, you know what I mean, during the Theranos, she talked like this. Now the reason that really struck me was because in graduate school I had one of my committee members. So for those who have never put themselves through the hell of graduate school, you have your advisor, who's your boss, and then you usually have a couple of committee members who are professors, usually in your department, and they conspire to decide your fate, whether you wash out in the first couple of years or when, if ever, you get to defend, and if you are allowed to, if you pass your defense and then finally get your PhD. Because if you wash out at any point before that, you don't end up with half a PhD. Those 6 or so years were just gone. In any case, one of my committee members, one of these people who decide my fate, said, that I had a teacher voice. Now, he didn't say it to me. I don't think it was meant to be constructive criticism about my pitch or even my vocal mannerisms when I presented scientific work. It was just that my voice sounded feminine, which was a weird thing to hear, because again, this is science, right? The data should kind of speak for itself. And I sort of thought my job was to explain the data and defend the conclusions I drew from those data. And, you know, in not so many words, I was told that there was something wrong with the fact that I'm a female scientist because my voice is too high. And so while, you know, that deception of her voice, she's not actually a baritone, was a little ridiculous in my mind, it's actually not too far off from my experience. Like, things could have gone a very different way. I could have tried to be an Elizabeth Holmes and drop my voice and, you know, try to kind of play that angle. You know, it's a little sad that that's the environment of female scientists, and probably scientists who don't kind of fit the historical demographic, is that we sort of are expected to conform rather than just be who we are and present our data. So maybe there is some element there of the people who kind of bought into Theranos kind of getting what they had coming.
Perhaps. Let's take a moment to check in with our producer, Daniel. Do we have any comments or super chats from the audience, Daniel?
Yes, we have a couple. So first off, thank you, Jonathan, for your super sticker. Thank you, Apollo Zeus, also sending a like. And thank you, Robert. He says, good to see you on ARCUK, Dr. Ribbens. Thank you for speaking out. The Theranos incident is a cautionary tale on so many levels and is scary for people who can't imagine a caveat emptor under capitalism.
Okay, thank you all very much for your contributions. Meghann, do you have any final thoughts on Elizabeth Holmes or Theranos before we sign off for today? Concluding thoughts?
I have a lot, but again, I don't want to end on the idea of scaring the audience. It scares me. And I still go to work every day, because the truth is that there are a lot of people. I mean, there's sort of this view that scientists are at best socially inept amoralists and mostly evil. Despite what I said at the beginning, where there are some genuinely corrupt actors, most of the people I work with day to day have families and friends, and they feel strongly about the patients that we don't even see most of the time. I think I mentioned on another show that I think about these families every day. You know, we have a gene therapy that we're trying to get into patients very young, because as they get older, the development is sort of cemented and there's not much we can do to ameliorate it. If we get them young, hopefully we can put them on the path of healthy development from the beginning, and they don't suffer the consequences of their genetic disorder. What that means for the families is that we are telling these parents and their families more generally, so your child has this severe genetic disorder. They're going to have seizures for their entire life, which is not going to be that long. So that's one option. Or you can let us inject your babies, and I mean 6 months old, with this experimental drug in their brain. I can't imagine that choice, but I think about it every day, and I know that a lot of my coworkers do too. Who want to make things better. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe most people would prefer to think of scientists as socially inept amoralists, but there are some good ones out there, and they're the only ones I think who can really make things better. And we do.
Well, I'm certainly glad you're on our side. Thank you very much for a fascinating discussion. One last question. Am I going to see you at OCON?
No, part of that is simply because I have too much work here.
Understood.
But I wish everyone a really good time, and yeah, enjoy the Miami weather.
I don't know about that, but I'll certainly enjoy the conference in the nice air-conditioned hotel. Daniel, any final super chats or announcements for today?
No more super chats, but in about 20 minutes at 7 p.m. UK time, we have the Fountainhead Book Club. Today, Shoshana Milgram will also join us, and that's for ARC UK members, and the session will also be live streamed to our YouTube members. Link is in the chat.
All right. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you to Dr. Meghann Ribbens for sharing her expertise and her reflections today, and for not doing today's episode in a baritonal voice.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. Okay, thanks very much. We'll talk again soon, and I'll see all of you at the Daily Objective probably tomorrow. Until then, I wish you all the best of premises. Thank you very much.
Cheers.